Hello and welcome to the Fuel Run Recover podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchuk, registered dietitian, running coach, marathon runner, and mom. This season, we're breaking down running's biggest trends, hot topics, and myths, and turning them into practical nutrition and training advice you can actually use every day. Let's get into it. Hey runners, before we get into today's episode, I want to ask you a quick question. Have you ever wondered if your nutrition is actually helping your running, or is it actually holding you back? If you want to find out, I've created a brand new free resource just for you. It's called the Runner's Fueling Audit. It's a super quick checklist that's going to help you spot the signs of underfueling, low energy availability, or where the gaps in your nutrition might be that are impacting your recovery and actually slowing you down. It only takes a few minutes to go through, and by the end, you're going to know whether or not your fueling is on the right track, or if you really need to start making some changes to the way you approach your eating so you can start to feel stronger on every run, reduce your injury risk, and actually get the results that you're training so hard for. You can grab your free copy right now by clicking on the link in the show notes. Again, this is called the Runner's Fueling Audit. It's a free downloadable resource, and it's going to give you so much clarity on how you can start feeling smarter and running stronger. All right, let's dive into today's episode. All right. Hello. Welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel Run Recover podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Stephanie Natchuk, and I am so thrilled today to be joined by a very special guest, Meridith Cass, who is the founder and CEO of Nix Biosensors, which you may or may not be familiar with. As a sport dietitian, I am very familiar and have been very excited about this product for a long time, ever since I first heard about it. And I'm really excited to have Meridith here on the show to talk about the development of the Nix biosensor, how it all came together, her background as a runner, that, some things that happened that prompted her to want to create this type of product, and, all of the incredible science and innovation that has gone into the creation of this device. So welcome to the show, Meridith.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So let's start us off, just sharing a little bit about your background, both as an athlete and then also as a CEO of your company. How did it all kind of come together for you to wind up where you are today?
Yeah, quite a few things came together. So professionally, I've worked in healthcare my whole career. So I'm not an MD or a PhD or anything like that, but I've worked with those types of practitioners for my whole career, helping them commercialize early stage technologies. So that process I was always very familiar with, and even just really early stage, kind of pre-commercial type innovations. On a personal level, I was a basketball player through college, and like a lot of former athletes, I think, turned to endurance sports a little bit later on in life. I started running maybe half marathons and things like that in my early 30s and graduated on into marathons. And so by the time I had clocked a few marathons and had struggled with hydration, I kind of married these two sides of my life together. And I sort of thought to myself, wouldn't it be amazing if regular people, not so much, patients, if you will, but just regular consumers and athletes and others could have access to better and more informational data on a day-to-day basis to make decisions about their health and wellness. And so obviously we're focused on hydration, but our interests as a company do go well beyond hydration. We can probably talk about that later. But really focusing on hydration as a place to start because it is such a profound problem for so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you have shared that it was one of your own marathons that actually prompted you to really see the need for this type of device. So kind of taking it from, oh, like this should exist. Wouldn't it be great to like, no, we need this thing. I need this thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I think every endurance athlete at some point has experienced some dehydration where they felt sluggish and they felt thirsty. They might have even, had more severe symptoms than that. But um, I think it's a feeling or a sentiment or an experience that we all share. But the one that really elevated it to what you just described of like, no, somebody must solve this is I actually had a hyponatremic event. And that, for those that aren't familiar with that, It's the concept of losing sweat, which of course has electrolytes in it, but replenishing with water means that you're diluting the blood. And if you're diluting your blood enough that sodium levels drop below a certain threshold, it can actually become really dangerous. And it's rare. It's more rare than dehydration. Sometimes people call it overhydration. But it's far more serious when it happens. And sadly, and thankfully not for me, but for others, it can cause death. And that does happen at marathons here and there. So it was a hyponatremic event for me at the Boston Marathon, in particular, that really kind of woke me up to somebody has to solve this.
Yeah, absolutely. And so going into that, what had you given much thought to your own hydration and electrolyte needs prior to that race? Was it something that, you had gotten by not really thinking about it, but had done okay? And it was just sort of like it all came together on that day? Or was it something you've been actively trying to pursue and solve prior to this, this one Boston Marathon that, really kind of brought it front and center?
For me personally, I had never really struggled, particularly profoundly with hydration. I think I certainly, like everybody else, was attempting to, do some trial and error and figure out like what works for me. When I started running marathons, by the way, I was a charity runner. So I was thrilled to have a coach that I got to work with, which many, at least newer runners, are kind of self-coached or, following a Hal Higdon on their own or whatever they're doing
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
training. But
Yep.
I was lucky to have a resource of somebody who was extremely experienced, and even they didn't have, and through no fault of his own, didn't have the right tools to tell me sort of, here's how much you should be drinking, here's how many, tables you should be stopping at. The only thing that I knew for sure was that when I was taking my goo or my chews or whatever, I was going to be drinking water in those instances. And so I was, attempting to take Gatorade or whatever, to get some electrolytes in those other circumstances. But in the grand scheme of things, I didn't have a consistent, we work with a lot of athletes now, as you can imagine, that consistently hit a wall at a certain point in their workout or something like that. So I wasn't having a consistent issue like that. And I think that's what even scared me more was that, all of a sudden I had this hyponatremic issue that, for anyone that's ever experienced it, the symptoms are very much the same as dehydration. So you're already overhydrated, but you're still intensely thirsty. You are uncomfortable. You're fatigued. You have all these other symptoms that's prompting you to drink more and more water. And for me specifically on that day, it was very warm on the Boston course. Anyone who's ever run Boston knows there's no shade on that course. You are in the sun the entire time if it's a sunny day. And so I think it was just kind of a perfect storm of factors that that combined with, I was a newer runner. I think it was only my third marathon at that time. It was just sort of the perfect storm.
Yeah, yeah. And for those listening that aren't, as familiar with the different ways that we can assess for hydration status and electrolyte losses and things like prior to this technology being developed, unless you had access to, unless you were a research participant at the Gatorade Sports Science Institute or some such thing, most runners did not have access to be able to collect this kind of data. And yes, there are companies that you can, send a sample to, things that you can do via mail, that sort of idea, and clinics, places you can go. Like it's not like it's completely inaccessible. But I've looked into it, and where I live in Canada, there are even fewer options. There's a couple of sport dietitians who do the testing, but it's not like it's just not a routine thing that people have access to. And as endurance sports, especially marathoning and ultra events and triathlon, have gotten so much more popular over the last couple of years, I truly believe that this is information that is absolutely critical because, as Meredith said, like in extreme cases and in very unfortunate cases, this can be fatal. Getting your hydration and your electrolytes wrong on these courses, these long, whether it's a marathon, ultra, triathlon, like it can be a matter of life and death. So I think having this information is something that everybody should know about.
I couldn't agree more. Worst case scenario, it's a life and death issue. Best case scenario, you've just wasted 4 to 6 months of training on a terrible race day because you didn't have the data. So we sort of see Again, whether you're going to go to a lab, we fully support any method by which somebody obtains this data. But whether it's in a lab or, of course, we'd love for somebody to find an impact by using our product. But it's data that is so fundamental, not just to safety, but performance, that it kind of seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. And we have lots of different methods for looking at fluid losses, right? There's different ways that people at home can do simple fluid loss tests. And even now we've got some pretty cool online calculators that can predict sweat losses, but they do not give you electrolyte information, right? That's the missing piece in all of this is what is
Right.
your electrolyte losses, per liter of sweat, et cetera. So we're going to talk about that next. And, I want to get into the development of the Nix biosensor. And, you mentioned you have a background in tech here. So for anyone who might be unfamiliar, we've been kind of stepping around and kind of, alluding to this device, this Nix biosensor that you created as a result of all of this. So for people who aren't familiar with this product, what exactly is it and how does it work?
So it is a sweat sensor. It has two physical components. There is a pod, which is about the size of the face of a watch. Or if you've got a Garmin watch, it's probably significantly smaller than the face of your Garmin watch, and
Fair,
very
fair.
lightweight. So we've got the pod, and then we've got a patch, and the patch is single use. So when you're going about a workout, you would take out the pod out of the charger, you would click it into a patch. There's a little, release liner on the back like a Band-Aid, and then it just sticks to your arm with kinesiology tape, like a KT tape or a rock tape.
Yeah. And so then during a workout, what exactly is the patch doing? So how is it working to, give you this electrolyte and hydration data?
So as you start to produce sweat, which usually happens in the first, say, 5 or 10 minutes as your body is warming up, the patch is then going to gather that sweat. It's going to funnel it through a very specific flow path inside that patch. And then we've got electrodes that are just screen printed into the flow path itself. So they don't even touch the skin. And those electrodes are measuring the sweat. So they're taking measurements every second. Specifically, they're measuring the electrolyte content of the sweat. And then we use a set of algorithms that can help us understand how quickly the sweat is moving through the patch so that we, in sort of that local location for an endurance athlete, we would have them wear it on the arm. You're getting that local reading of continuous and cumulative fluid electrolyte losses, both of those at the same time, such that you could be understanding your cumulative fluid and electrolyte needs that you need to be replenishing. So in that way, the patch is measuring something locally on the arm. We're extrapolating it to the full surface area of the body, and then reporting that data through the app, which is either in your phone or you can boomerang that data over to your Garmin watch or your bike computer or your Apple Watch or whatever device you might be using already to track your run. You can set custom notifications. So if you want to be reminded to consume fluids, let's say every 5 ounces, it will send you a notification every time you have lost 5 ounces. If that's every 5 minutes or every 25 minutes, it just has to do with how quickly you're losing those 5 ounces. But you can customize those notifications as well to come through. And when that workout is over, you can then look at all of that workout summary data. So in the real time, we keep the data exceedingly simple. We don't want anybody trying to do any crazy analytics or math in their head while they're focused on their workout. But when that workout is over, we give you that moment by moment graph of what the losses looked like, how the sweat rate changed. If it got hotter, you went up a hill. If it got colder or you slowed down, we can see all that in the data.
Amazing. Amazing. And so when you went into the development of this product, because, like we were saying, this isn't something that existed before. What were some of the biggest challenges that you encountered, on the development of this technology?
Tons of challenges. I mean, at its core, if we think about a biosensor, it's kind of three products in one, first of all. So there's kind of the physiological side. So understanding what even is it that we're reading in the sweat, and is it a validated biomarker? That's kind of the first one. So building a sensor that can even measure the sweat was kind of the first task. And obviously for us, that included two physical components because, and we can get into sort of why we made this decision, but the patch is disposable because in the absence of that, we would have to ask the user to be flushing it out and cleaning it in between every use. It's a horrible user experience. So it's, we almost think about like a used Band-Aid. It's going to be a lot more convenient to just throw it away, or we certainly have recycling programs. But for us, even just building the sensor, both the patch and the pod, was kind of challenge number one. Challenge number two is we weren't even entirely sure, as you mentioned, because nobody had ever done this before, we weren't sure exactly what kind of data we were going to get. And so we didn't know exactly what our algorithms were going to have to do with that raw data to turn it into. So for any tech geeks that happen to be listening, we're using an impedance measurement of the sweat itself to get at the electrolyte content. And that we were able to validate in advance, but to then sort of take like a local reading and extrapolate it to the full surface area of the body, that takes a whole nother set of machine learning algorithms that we had to develop that are totally proprietary. So we've got the hardware, we now got the data science. The third piece is an app. And to be honest, for many startups, an app alone is the whole product. We'd already built two products by the time we got to the app. So the third piece is starting to figure out, how do we present this end user data to somebody who's in the middle of a workout where the very last thing they're trying to do is any kind of mental gymnastics or arithmetic in their head, right? How do we make an exceedingly simple, actionable interface while, of course, building, the full back end of an app like any software developer has to. So when we think about kind of the challenges in bringing Nix to market, that was really number one is, it took us 4 years to build the patch, the pod, the algorithms, and the software. And I guess the last point was we had to do it sequentially, because until we know that the biomarker is validated and build the sensor itself, we don't know what the algorithms really need to do or how they need to behave until we have that raw data from the sensors. And then certainly we can't build the software until we know what those algorithms look like as well.
So you've got the patch, you've got the sensor, you've got the app, you're ready to roll this out and, bring it to market. When you first launched, and you'll have to remind me what year that was, what was the reception that you got from, kind of those early adopters of the platform and everything? So was there anything that surprised you with that feedback that you got right off the bat?
We launched almost exactly 3 years ago, just before holiday in 2022. And I think honestly, we were just so pleasantly surprised by how immediately the endurance segment just kind of took to this, to the concept in general, I think.
Yep.
And for something that, I think we all know athletes that kind of fit into this category that are maybe of a slightly older generation, maybe a little bit, less likely to wear a Garmin or less likely to, track other metrics. And they're also less likely to even bring fluids on a run with them, or
fair
plan around a route that there's like a water fountain or a store or something like that. And so it was such an open question for us of, is so much of our product is built around sort of the real-time data experience and prompting an athlete to know kind of the when, what, and how much to drink in the moment, right? That's really the core of the value here. And so it was an open question of, especially with that older generation, we sort of think of them, we call them kind of our lone wolf profile. Is that somebody who's even going to get excited about our data and be curious about it? Or are they sort of just going to be like, I've got this. I've been running for 30 years without this technology. I'll figure it out. And overwhelmingly, people were really excited about it. And I think it's all centered around where we started this conversation of this universal experience that endurance athletes have all had some sort of dehydration incident where they, where it ruined a run, or maybe it ruined a race, or whatever the case may be. And so we were so incredibly fortunate that not just our users, but that the media was also pretty excited about it. And hydration is just such an understandable, relatable topic in the endurance world. And so we were pretty happy. And I think it helped us, like every new product has some, warts and bumps and bruises. And I think it helped our users to really kind of get over those and to be
Yeah.
forgiving of those.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And I remember, I don't exactly remember where or how I heard about the Nix biosensor initially, but I was so excited. I was like as soon as it was for sale in Canada, I was ordering mine. And then the Android app hadn't launched yet. It was only
Yeah.
for Apple. And I was so sad because I couldn't like I could download the app on my iPad, but I didn't have that like real time
Yeah.
sort of data. So I still could use it at first, but I think that the Android app came like maybe just a couple months later. It wasn't that long of
Yeah.
a wait.
Yep.
But yeah, it was really exciting for me and obviously for myself being a runner as well, but also another piece of information to be able to use that with clients. So,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about how you've also grown in the sense of using this as something that coaches can use with their athletes. I know that there's been a ton of innovation on the app side as well, looking at that from that
Yes.
perspective too, not necessarily just the person in the moment, but how can like we as professionals use this to also help better the programming and the planning that we help our clients with.
Yes, and this is so key because exactly folks like yourself who are sort of there trying to educate others. Like it was so important that we at least built the product initially so that, a regular Joe like me who's not coached could pick it up and use it, and that the
Yep.
data was intuitive and actionable. But there is a next level, especially when we're thinking about coaches and their practices working with their athletes, that hydration and fueling is a huge part of the coaching that they're delivering. So if
Mhm.
we can provide value to those coaches in serving their athletes and maybe even helping coaches, distinguish their services from, the next coach down the line,
Yeah, yeah.
then that's a huge value. And so what we did was then launch, we do have a couple different software platforms now that all integrate with the same sensor. So it's all integratable. And they integrate with one another so that if my coach is halfway across the country, I can be logging a workout on my own platform on my phone. We call that Nix Solo. And my coach can still see it on their end through a different platform so that I'm just, allowing permission. And I think that's just so critical because I think coaches just have, and experts like yourself and sports dietitians just have a certain, just more robust ability to do those analytics to sort of overlay the workout data with the nutritional data and the replenishment and the losses and sort of say, okay, you're hitting this particular pattern at mile 18 every week or whatever the case might be, right?
Yep.
And so, yeah, it's been, certainly we've done that within the endurance field, but we've been really fortunate that a lot of other sports have sort of come to us and said, hey, we struggle with hydration too. Can your platform work for us? And,
Yeah.
that extends to the ends of the earth, whether it's a football team, whether it's a soccer team, whether it's a fire department. I mean, we work with all
Oh,
sorts of different
okay.
groups that really need to maintain hydration for safety and performance as well.
Yeah. Oh, super interesting. Yeah, I definitely like I wouldn't have thought about that for sure. So that actually leads me to the next thing I want to talk about. Who is the Nix biosensor for? Can you kind of describe, the sort of ideal user of this product, or as you kind of alluded to, there's actually a variety of different uses and a variety of different, both work and recreation spaces that this can
Yeah.
make a huge impact. So tell us a little bit more about all the different places that you've seen this really help people.
Yeah, I mean, it really gets pretty wild in certain circumstances, and I credit our early success and word of mouth with bringing people to us inbound that we with use cases that I never in a million years would have thought of.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'll entertain you with a few of them, but I will say we absolutely our product is rooted in the endurance community. That's who it was built
Hmm.
for originally. It's how it was designed, both the physical product and the software platforms. But when we do think about something as foundational to human health and performance as hydration is, it's almost impossible to not be thinking about these other applications. So
Hmm.
I was sort of alluding, like the immediate extension, of course, was to folks like football teams who are really susceptible to heat and humidity,
Hmm. Hmm.
just given the time of year when they're doing preseason and two-a-days and things like that, especially in the southern states. So really any team sport or outdoor sport,
Yep.
clear applications there. But this one has surprised me, especially as a former basketball player myself, where we don't think of basketball being a high need case because you're in a climate controlled arena and you have plenty of stoppage time to be
Yeah.
replenishing.
Yeah. Yep.
But I think human performance culture has extended well beyond the endurance athlete at this point. And not just elite sports or Olympic level, but collegiate and youth
Yep.
level as well. It's as much about safety as it is about performance. And then for us, the labor vertical, I mentioned firefighters, but whether it's construction or oil and gas or mining, or there's myriad factory-based use cases where heat is an important part of the manufacturing, like brick making and metal foundries,
Yeah.
and you'd be
Yeah. Yeah.
shocked at, bakeries, at the places where heat crops up. And the really fun one for us has been the research vertical. So we have researchers all over the globe doing all sorts of research that range for things you might expect, like doing, in-field research with athletes, because nobody's been able to get this data in the field before. You had to be in a
Hmm.
lab.
Yep. Yep.
And so that has incredible value. But then, I mean, we have people doing product R&D at apparel companies, all the
Okay.
big names,
Yeah.
trying to understand thermoregulatory properties of different fabrics.
Hmm.
We have people doing sweat-based studies with older adults because we do lose our ability to sweat as efficiently as we age. We have antiperspirant companies doing research, trying to
Oh, okay.
understand like product R&D, and even I think we now have two groups doing equine studies. We don't think
Okay.
about like horses sweat as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
some of that gets a little bit crazy, as you can imagine, things we never would have thought of. But I think when anybody uses the product for the first time, it's pretty clear that it really got its roots in the endurance community.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And two, looking at it from the fueling side of things, we're talking about hydration and heat and sweat losses and stuff, and the thing that Nix answers that no other method, I should say, accessible method has been able to
Yeah.
offer before. It's also understanding electrolyte needs. And so even,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that this is a huge part of, the application of your work in other fields would also be the development of those personalized sport products,
Yes.
planning for that race, planning for that event, now using the data that we've collected to understand your fluid losses and your electrolyte losses. Now we can create that strategic fueling plan of what you're going to take when, whether it's what you're bringing on the course, what you're stopping for at the aid stations, how you're combining different products so that we can accurately address your fluids, your fuel, and your electrolyte requirements to a much higher degree than we were really able to before. Because,
Yes.
what I want listeners to, like you have to understand how rudimentary this was prior to having this technology in this space. We
Yeah.
did not have really clear guidelines for electrolyte replacement. We knew as dietitians that some people lose a little bit of salt in their sweat, and we knew that other people lose a lot in their sweat. But beyond that, it was like, do you think that you're a salty sweater based on, physical data? And it was just very like, do you notice that you have a crustiness on your skin afterwards? But of
Yeah.
course, there's so many things that can affect whether or not you actually get that visible salt. Like that's a very
Yeah.
rudimentary like checklist of things. And it was a lot of trial and error and wanting to be kind of on the safe side, we're going to recommend 400 milligrams of sodium per hour kind of thing. But if you're an athlete who loses 1,000 milligrams of sodium per hour, like you're at much higher risk of running into problems than the person who is only losing 200 but replacing 400. But you don't want to tell
Yes.
everyone to replace 1,000 because that's way more
Yes.
than some people need. And like it was just a very challenging thing to navigate. And it's
Yeah.
amazing that it took us until the year 2022 to have something that people could
Fascinating.
access. Yeah.
Yeah, no, fascinating. Like truly, and you just perfectly encapsulated the exact issue of like, when there's that much inter-individual variability, how
Hmm.
could anybody, even the scientific experts out in the world who do this, kind of research for a living, how could they ever come up with guidelines that were going to be one size fits all? You really
Yeah.
can't, when
Yeah.
there's like a 4x range, that's not a practical or useful guideline. So yeah, no, it's fascinating that it took the world and the world of innovation this long to create a solution for this, but you've really just honed in on the specific aspect of our product that people engage with the most and that
Hmm.
are, most intrigued by, which is this concept of like, what is the composition of my sweat
Hmm.
specifically? And
Yeah.
how do I then take that data forward to figure out what's right for me? And so
Yes.
we do that with a metric we call sweat composition. And as the name might imply, it's basically looking at the quantity of specifically in milligrams, the quantity of electrolytes in a single ounce of your sweat. And by putting it on that kind of per ounce basis, it enables us to compare an individual athlete's sweat with the huge range of hydration options that they have available to them.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
for example, I lose 43 milligrams of electrolytes per ounce of my sweat. We have somebody else on our internal team over here that's at like 95, 96. So literally
Okay.
twice
Yeah.
as salty a sweater as I am.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it just helps us understand, should we be drinking Scratch or Element or just taking Gatorade off the table? Or if we do want to take Gatorade off the table, should we be augmenting with salt tablets or
Hmm. Hmm.
whatever the strategy might be? And for everything that you just described a moment ago, that can get pretty complicated. It's not as
Yeah.
easy as just like, hey, stop at every table and grab a Gatorade. And that's why
Yeah.
folks like you, and other coaches and things like that, it's so important sometimes to have that perspective to create
Yeah.
that custom strategy.
Exactly, exactly. And so, are there any like really big mistakes or misconceptions or things that you see people kind of getting wrong with using your sensor and looking at the data? Like, what are some of the things that you see people are, that's not quite how it works. That's not quite what you're supposed to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, there's always edge cases for sure. I would say, first of all, before somebody uses our product, invariably we find people are under replenishing their fluids
Yeah.
and their electrolytes.
Oh yeah, easily.
And the magnitude of that is what becomes concerning, right? If you're under replenishing by a little bit, you may not even feel the effect of it. But if it's substantive, that's where you can get in trouble. And that's true both on a fluid deficit side as well as an electrolyte deficit side. But once
Yeah.
people use the platform, from there, I mean, candidly, it's so simple and easy to use that more often than not, when people are writing into customer service and they're saying, like, hey, what do I do with the data? It's because it was too intuitive. When we're sort of saying, like, hey, remember when we said you lose 18 ounces of fluids per hour? Aim to replenish 18 ounces of fluids per hour. I mean, it's
Yeah.
literally quite that simple. So,
Yeah.
so once people have used the platform, I don't think we really, there's not usually much confusion beyond that. It's more about how do they want to incorporate that into their training and into their race day.
Yeah.
What products do they want to pick? We've tried to make it easy as well that, for example, if at a 43 milligram per ounce sweat composition, if the product that is technically appropriate for me is maybe noon, but I have a preference for Scratch, then we can give you kind of the product to water ratio for Scratch that's going to then match your composition. So we try to make that really straightforward.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And the location on the body, the patch still needs to be worn on the bicep? Because I know some people have asked about that as well. Like, can you put it anywhere, or does it need to specifically be worn on the bicep?
It's a great question. Right now, it needs to be on the bicep, and the reason is because we're just taking local readings of the sweat on the arm. And of course, we sweat very differently on different sites of the body. So we've adjusted our algorithms at the moment to go from the arm to the full body. That doesn't mean in the future that we can't do, chest to the full body or a scapula to the full body. And to be honest, we have done that in other use cases for like firefighters and football players where the bicep is not the best place to wear it. So it's in the future, we will be having more options where you'll just have to remember to tell the app where that patch had been placed. But
Okay.
for now, it really does need to be the arm.
Yeah, yeah. Great tidbit. So now you've been able to collect so much of this data. You're looking at all of this data that's coming in through the app and probably able to see some trends and gather some information that probably wasn't available before. We're
Yeah.
talking about all of these different people and all these different settings and stuff like that. Are there any trends or primary drivers that you've been able to see about electrolyte or about sweat losses and electrolyte composition? So,
Yeah.
environment, genetics, gender, humidity, training experience. Like, what are the things that really like influence our sweat rate and our sweat composition?
So many fascinating things and things that won't surprise us, right? Things that we kind of knew qualitatively, like on average, men are sweating faster than women are. Or this one I thought was interesting. It wasn't intuitive to me necessarily, but on average, when we are running, we have a faster sweat rate than if we're cycling. So a lot of our multi-sport athletes, we can capture that data and look at it that way. So
Yep.
we do tend to lose more sweat when running versus cycling. But this one was really fascinating to me is we were talking about the inter-individual variability a minute ago, the difference from one athlete to another, but the intra-individual variability for one athlete from one day to the next blew my mind, where for a single athlete from one day to the next, we can see how dramatically their sweat rate will change. And I think we all kind of understand and qualitatively know that when it's hotter and more humid, certainly we're going to have,
Hmm.
a higher sweat rate. But even in controlled conditions, in the exact same workout at the same power output from one day to the other, we actually see a pretty significant change in sweat rate. And so, what's fascinating about that is that I don't think the scientific community has even really yet discovered why. Why would it be different
Hmm.
on one day versus the other if you're
That was
doing
going to be
the
my
exact
question.
same workout? So there are hypotheses that people are studying, whether it's, was there caffeine consumption one day and not the other? Was there a higher baseline core body temperature because somebody was getting sick or something like that?
Okay.
Does diet have anything to do with it? So I think there's still open questions there, but in the meantime, it's a fascinating statement of, you could be going out to do the exact same, workout that you've been doing for
Yeah.
weeks, and you're going to have a different, output that day. The last thing I'll say that's been really eye-opening is that we've seen very, very clearly that the concentration of your electrolytes in your sweat is very positively correlated with your sweat rate. So, put differently, if you're doing a workout and all of a sudden you increase the pace, and so therefore, obviously, your body's producing more heat, your sweat rate is going up because you're putting in more effort. You will actually see that the electrolyte concentration in your sweat also increases at that period of time. And this is something that we can tie back to
Yeah.
the biology. You probably know this really well, Steph, which is the sweat gland wants to retain electrolytes. There is a function in the gland biologically that's reabsorbing those electrolytes. But as you start to sweat faster, it can't keep pace. And so more electrolytes are escaping through. So if I'm at on a really slow and low kind of intensity long run, my electrolyte needs are lower than when I'm doing a
Mhm.
tempo run or speed work or just, maybe at race pace or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that also, can be why some people do fine in training, but then consistently struggle on race day. And
Yeah.
something I always, want runners to understand and, endurance athletes, but who are going from one distance to the next is like things that worked for you in a half marathon or a Olympic distance triathlon will not just be copy paste to that
Yeah.
next distance, right? Because as you mentioned earlier, the compounding effect of dehydration and the progressive loss of electrolytes are going to only get more significant as those distances get longer. And so we want to be really mindful of, oh yeah, for my half marathon, I took a few sips of water here and there and I was fine. That does not mean that you're going to be fine during a marathon by any
Yep.
stretch.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So something else that I wanted to ask about, because, this is something that comes up a lot with the, discussions we have around heat acclimation and what happens to the body during heat acclimation, something that is sort of shared around, and maybe your data has supported this, or maybe it's told us a bit of a different story, is that when you are more heat acclimated, you are losing more sweat, but you are getting more efficient at retaining electrolytes. Has that shown to be the case with the data that you've seen?
Yes, we have definitely seen that.
Okay.
I'll be honest, we have not done any formally controlled acclimatization studies ourselves, but we have
Hmm.
certainly seen the trend as an individual is adjusting to the heat. We already knew, in the scientific literature that
Hmm.
folks will start to sweat more, their body becomes more efficient in that sweating. But we do see, as you said, an efficiency where the concentration of electrolytes or of sodium in particular is reduced. And so again, I'm not sure everyone knows or the scientific community knows the sort of rationale behind why that's happening, but it does seem to be a consistent observation.
Yeah, okay, that's really good to know. Yeah, so going forward, kind of looking ahead here, how do you see hydration and electrolyte science really evolving in the coming years? Like what are you excited about in terms of the things that you're going to offer and all of those different capabilities with Nix and with the other things that your company might be working on?
I think part and parcel with having personal data is having personal strategies and personal solutions. So we've
Hmm.
already started to see a trend, including with hydration partners of ours, the opportunity to tailor not just a strategy to somebody's individual needs, but even a product to somebody's individual
Hmm.
needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're starting now to discuss with a lot of our hydration partners, um, things like if you want a specialized formula for ultra athletes or you want a specialized formula for female athletes, how do we use the data you were alluding to a moment ago? Like, as far as we know, we are now the largest database of sweat data that we know about out in the world.
Hmm.
So, can we use that critical mass of data now to inform what should a formula look like for an ultra
Yeah.
runner, or what should it look like for a female runner, or what should it look like for a newer runner, right? Are there
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
needs? Or,
Hmm.
we think about formulas are often right now often tailored to, is it kind of like an everyday hydration, or is it a recovery, or sometimes they do have formulas specifically for ultras. But is that something where now we're going to start to think about different formulas for different environments or different
Yeah.
workout types? The data is very clear that you should be hydrating differently for a long run than you should be for, a like speed work or more of a tempo run. So are we
Hmm.
going to start to see brands kind of adjusting their formulas based on the workout type and not
Yeah.
just the individual?
Yeah, yeah. And also, I mean, like to have maybe a little bit more science going into even to the development of some of the products. Because I'll be honest,
Yeah.
like as a sport dietitian, I was doing a lot of product. I ran the New York City Marathon a couple weeks ago, and as I was training, I was like, I'm going to try all the different things out there. I'm going to try all these different products, and I'm going to post and share these different product reviews. And so many times in my head, as I'm looking at the composition of some of these things, I'm thinking, like, who made this? What were like? I would love to sit down with some of these people. Like, what were you thinking when you put like zero sodium in this product for marathon
Yeah.
runners? Like, why is there no salt in this thing? And just, to look at the quality of the things that are on the market. We have a lot of different options, but not all of them are, in my opinion, really made with the needs of these athletes in mind. And so I would love to see, athletes have more data, be choosing products that are more appropriate for them, and then, of course, the companies kind of following suit with developing things that are just going to be more aligned.
I completely agree. It seems so often that a lot of the hydration brands are putting together products and product messaging really based on marketing and who they're trying to
Mm-hmm.
target as
Yep.
opposed to what their scientific needs are. And to some degree, I think it's easy for us to be sort of skeptical of brands and corporate America. But if we're giving them some benefit of the doubt, this, as you started the conversation here today, this electrolyte data was not previously available,
Yeah.
especially out in the field. So historically, even in a lab, if you wanted to understand the electrolyte losses of somebody, you would literally have to pour a bucket of water, a very specific volume of water over the head. It's called a wash down, literally washing the electrolytes off the body, squeegee it into a drain in the floor and collect it and then measure that water. I mean, it is incredibly inaccurate, cumbersome, expensive,
Hmm.
impractical. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
amount of research that we have on electrolyte losses for athletes is decades behind what we have on fluid losses. That's a lot
Hmm.
easier to study.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to throw some of these brands a little benefit of the doubt, it's that there really hasn't
Yeah.
been much data for them to build this on. And so our hope, of course, at Nix is that we don't partner with any one brand. We are completely agnostic in that respect. We want to make sure the athlete is getting what they need
Hmm.
wherever they get it from. But we do hope that people will start to pick up that data and understand a bit better that, if they see a market opportunity, let's say for ultra runners or trail
Hmm.
runners, and that's who they want to target, that they'll actually use the data from that population to drive what that formula looks like.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So cool, so exciting, and just something like I said that I was so excited about when I first heard about it, and have had so many athletes make use of it, and again, to get that data and to see, oh my gosh, we talk in like milligrams and liters up here in Canada, but you're losing 800 milligrams of electrolytes per liter of sweat. Like we need to massively jack up your
Yeah.
electrolyte replacement. And like it has been incredibly informative for me and the people that I work with. So I want to thank you for your innovation. And I'm very sorry that you had a hyponatremic event, but I think it's done the world a great service in the long run.
Thank you. I hope so. I think it's really important data, so I'm thrilled that it's resonating with people.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful. So, I hope that the listeners of this episode are also as excited as I clearly am about this product. So share with us where people can learn more about the Nix Biosensor, where they can pick it up. Do you have it in retailers? Do you just order it online? And, where, of course, they can learn more.
Yeah, we do, of course, have it in run stores and things like that all over North America and abroad now as well. But of course, the easiest place is always just going to the website. So that's just nixbiosensors.com. And you can get all sorts of product information. We've got validation data on the site. We've got case studies and white papers that we've written if you are really excited to dig into the data. But pretty much everything you could want to know about the product is there.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Meredith. It was such a pleasure talking to you today and making the time to come and share with all of us all of your insights and innovation. And I'm sure we'll hear from you again very soon. That's it for this week's episode. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will catch you back here next week. Bye for now. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.